Hello guys, welcome to hour 8, the final hour of our Yixing teapot. So the last time you cut the opening for the lid, you made the lid. Now we're going to work on a piece of the lid called the flange. So if you have any lidded form or ceramic piece in your house, if you look at the bottom of the lid, there is usually a piece that kind of hangs off and fits really well into the opening of the form, whatever it may be. So we're going to be making that. As you see, I rolled out a slab for this. I recommend a slab. I had my students try coils last year and they just didn't look as well done. So we're going to do slabs this year for our flange. Now, I can't remember the measurement I made here. I think it was somewhere between 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch. I don't think it was exactly 1/4 inch or exactly 1/2 inch. It ended up being what I liked. You might go for a little bit of a longer flange. You might go for that kind of shorter 1/4 inch flange. I would say 1/2 inch would be pretty big for just the general size of our teapot. So I just gave you a little look at that thickness, just a normal thickness, and then you just essentially cut a long thin strip. So this flange is going to go on the bottom of our lid. Now what you're going to have to do is measure the rim that you saw I measured right there. So mine was about 1/4 inch. That's what your guys should have been. And you're going to make those 4 kind of guiding points. I do it in like a compass form, like northeast, southwest. That's what I recommend doing. And if you can find something, like I have that cup right there that I could find that's perfectly going to trace that size that I'm looking for. But if you can't, I would just eyeball it the best you can. And really just be slow in drawing that line. Continue it on for those little kind of 4 quadrants. From like that north to east point and the east to south, etc. But if you can find something to trace like I did, that is amazing. It is definitely makes your life a little easier. Okay, so I trace it, and then the next thing to do is to make sure that your flange is going to fit properly. So I end up trimming some clay back here just because the flange is it's just too long to even try to wrap around and see how to measure it. So you see me cut off quite a bit of clay there. And then the important part here is that you're wrapping the flange on the inside of that line that you made. So that outside of the slab is on the inside of that line, okay? Essentially, you want this flange to fit right inside of that opening. So you see me do that here. And an important part of this is that you do have some wiggle room. You do not want your flange to be perfectly in line with your teapot. You want it to have some wiggle room. And so I'm going to move on to slipping and scoring the flange together, those 2 edges where I created that beveled diagonal cut. I would definitely do that again this time. So I'm slipping and scoring those together, and then I'll spend some time smoothing out this flange now. I'll attach it onto the lid and then smooth it out then as well. But the reason, just to go over why you don't want it to be totally snug, is because the clay, when it goes through the shrinking process of drying out into the bone dry stage, and then when it goes through firing, when you add glaze onto it, glazing is an extra layer of glass on top of the clay. So you might want to go even less snug than I did here. This could even be a gamble. I might not just even glaze the flange to avoid any kind of issue with that in the future. Okay, so something to think about. So now I'm slipping and scoring the flange onto the lid. Again, we're going on the inside, so this really shows you where you should be slipping and scoring. Okay, and then you'll see me add on quite a bit of slip here. Like I always say, adding on slip, like plenty of it, is really just going to set you up for success, because then you don't have to spend a lot of time really attaching and blending it out later. And then I grabbed a paddle and I just used it to add some pressure onto the flange and make sure it really bonded well with that lid. I feel like that was a necessary step for me. It might be something that your flange works perfectly the first time. It might be something you really do want to do. And then I just spent some time cleaning it up and just really making sure that everything's in place. And because I added so much slip, I didn't really have to worry too much about really blending out that inside area where the flange meets the lid. Okay, now I would say at this point in time, you'd want to take a break from the clay. I smoothed out my clay on my teapot, but you'll want your flange and your lid to set up in the way that mine's setting up. You don't want it to kind of be too wet when you kind of move on from here, or when you start letting your teapot dry out, because the lid will most likely start to kind of go inwards. It will start to like deflate in a way. So the clay, just with gravity, the way that's going. So now the last part of this is making the handheld part of the lid. So for me, I just decided to go with a simple ball. So you see me rolling out a ball, and then right now I'm kind of coning the end of that ball. And so what I'm doing here is I'm just making the lid more functional. I didn't want it to just be like a slipped and scored ball on top of it. I wanted it to be kind of more of this shape that you're seeing there, a little bit less long. So I have to kind of go back in and cut it. Now you might approach your lid in a different way. You can go with however you want to really go with this lid. I just went simple with the ball. If you want to use a coil or a flattened out slab like we did for the flange, and you want to make like a tiny little handle, you can. Whatever you make, you just want to make sure you attach it on very well, and that your clay is already set up at this point, because if your clay is not set up, there's not a really good way to have it sit and try to dry into that. I would say about leather hard. So once you get your ball into the size that you want to get it, you are going to slip and score it on. Now, to get it centered, this is kind of a process. I just wanted to show you. I get my ruler and I measure the length, and I find that exact middle, and I make a line. You might make a little bit more of a dash. I just did the line because I wanted to kind of, again, get that like north, south, east, west thing going for me, that grid structure. So I make that line, and then I do the same thing there as I found that center, and then I just made another line through it. Okay, and this was just for me to understand where to slip and score that center point on. This will be helpful if you're someone who has a any type of lid, just to make sure it is getting on there straight. So I have that as a guider, and then I slip and score it on. And then once you slipped and scored it on, you want to really blend it out, make sure it's really well attached onto there, so you're not worrying about it breaking off, and then you're having to grab the lid by the sides, like in that area. The last thing I do is I just go over and I smooth out those lines that I made on my lid to guide myself. I smooth out that area where the lid attaches to itself, or well, the handle, I guess, of the lid attaches to the lid. And then, yeah, that is pretty much it. At this time, you might go back and you might spend some more time smoothing out other parts of your teapot, maybe any of those imperfections that have accumulated along the way, things like that. And that is pretty much the last step of making the teapot. So the last piece of information I want to leave you with is how to kind of store your teapot so the lid and the teapot itself stay separated and the clay doesn't kind of blend together and stick together. So I grab a thin piece of paper towel and I kind of plant it inside of that opening. I know it's kind of off screen, sorry about that. I do end up making like an X kind of formation. So this is something I do recommend just because it will help in making sure that your lid doesn't attach to the teapot itself. So yeah, that is pretty much it. Good job, guys, for making it this far. I know it was difficult, but now you have a beautiful teapot for yourselves. And yeah, good luck with this last hour.